Are you considering pitching or selling during a podcast interview, but not sure how to do it without coming across as pushy? Do you struggle with finding the right balance between speaking and listening as a host or a guest? And what about those moments when you accidentally interrupt your guest, like I've done sometimes, while they're speaking? These are just some of the common challenges that can come up during a podcast interview. And in this episode, we are exploring tips and strategies for navigating them with ease. We are talking about the do's and don'ts of podcast interviewing with my guest, Jason Cercone. This is the last part of our 4-part series, and I know you will get a lot of value from this conversation. Jason is a podcast branding strategist, author, and experienced podcaster. He helps value-driven coaches and consultants establish authority and become thought leaders in their niche via strategic and impactful podcast guest appearances. He also hosts the Voice of Evolution of Brand podcast, which you can find more information about in the show notes. So if you are ready to listen in as we talk about the importance of setting clear expectations, mitigating distractions, and also the often hot topic of selling during a podcast interview, why don't you join me and let's dive into the do's and don'ts of podcasting. Welcome to this last episode. Jason, thank you so much for being here for 4 episodes on my podcast. I'm so grateful.
Loved every minute of it. Let's come in for a smooth landing.
I love that. We had a really hot topic last week in last week's episode, and I just want you to know that I appreciate you so much and the value and the perspective that you're giving me, you give my audience. I think we all always have an opportunity to learn, always have an opportunity to grow. And just because you've done something one way your whole life does not mean that it has to stay that way forever. So right. I appreciate you, and I'm grateful that you came and challenged me on this show. I think that it's really important because I don't like to be right all the time, you know? Well, I'm already right at home all the time. No, I'm just joking.
How boring would life be if we didn't welcome some new perspectives into our world?
Absolutely. Right? Absolutely. I could not agree with you more.
Glad I was able to do that for you.
Thank you. And in this episode, we are talking about the do's and don'ts that guests and hosts need to know as it relates to podcasting. I think this ties in nicely about, challenging different thoughts. And, I think maybe the best place to start is thinking about some of those do's and don'ts that are very, very common. And we can just kind of riff off of them as we go through. And I want this to be an episode that is just just very helpful for our listener right now. And just some quick hits and quick tips that they can just take and that they can implement, and we'll go wherever it goes. Does that sound good to you?
That sounds great to me. Let's make it happen.
Okay, awesome. I was thinking about this, and one of the first things that came to mind is the sales pitch. And so I've talked about this, you've talked about this a little bit throughout the series. One of the biggest things for me, and I always like razz on authors a little bit because I feel like they're so used to their key points, you know what I mean? And sticking to the message and making sure you're sticking to that key point, which is very important. Don't get me wrong, because you want to stay on brand, you want to stay on target, you want to stay on what you're talking about, and you want to stay on those key messages. And also, it's a very fine line between key messages and sales pitches. So one of my don'ts is do not go into a sales pitch.
Agreed. Podcasts are not a platform for selling because, again, we've talked about this throughout the series. The listener experience is what it's all about. And no one is tuning into a podcast for an infomercial, for a sales pitch. You get more value from selling without selling. And what I mean by that is showcasing your value, giving a person to buy into your message, to resonate with that message, to get invested in you. And then in doing that, they're probably thinking about a buying decision already because they trust what you're saying. You didn't spend the whole time trying to be a salesperson. And then the host on the podcast that they love to listen to is telling them to go buy as well. Go check out the book, go buy the course, whatever, because you held up your end as the guest. You brought value to the show. You helped create riveting content. So now the host naturally is going to believe in you as well and tell their audience they should do the same. So you get much further doing it that way than just trying to sell. And I will say this too, if you go into sales mode, many times podcasters won't even air the episode. So it's a complete waste of your time.
That's a really interesting point. And it's a little bit awkward though, to just listen to someone talk about, okay, I'm going to go back to authors again. Cause I was just editing an episode the other day not for my podcast, for a different podcast, for a client's podcast. And the guest just kept saying, like, every time the host wanted to go deep about something or talk about something and like get a little bit of information out of the story, it was, yeah. And as I described in my book, but it's not, I don't want to hear as you described in your book. I'm going to read your book. You know what I mean? I want to hear how it actually was for you in that moment. And actually by bringing that human element into it, I think would probably lead you to more book sales or more sales overall and whatever it is that you're trying to sell, because people are buying into your story.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. You know? Yeah. And that's where, I mean, you can ask the right questions to lead to engaging, potentially conversation starting content, but sometimes that person just can't break free from those shackles and they just feel that they have to revert everything back to what they wrote in the book. And that to me, it just, it could potentially lead to a couple sales, but I think you get more sales and more people paying attention to what you're doing if you bring value to the microphone and you showcase all of this expertise that led you to write that book.
Absolutely. So on that note, on that thought, let's talk about the balance in between host and guest. And when you're talking back and forth and you're having a conversation, a lot of the times what I see is host asks the question, guest answers a really long answer, then host asks another question and just goes into like that back and forth. You know, it's very cut and dry, like question, answer, question, answer. How important do you think it is to have that balance in conversation? And on the flip side, thoughts on, I mean, I got strong opinions on this one too, let's be honest, but like thoughts on cutting your guest off when they're talking.
Here's my answer, and you go to the next question. That's not a conversation. That's an interview. And we talked about that in the second part of the series. If you are putting somebody in an interview situation, it's not going to be as free flowing. It's not going to be as organic. It's just going to be very canned. And it's not going to lead to that engaging content. So this is where preparation comes into play, which is something we talked about in this series as well. If you're prepared and you know something about that guest, you can have a powerful conversation and bounce off of one another. And in doing that, that's going to make for more compelling content. Now, interrupting and cutting someone off as if you're giving them the hook because they're too long-winded are two different things, in my opinion. Because again, you know that you have to have some balance in this, but sometimes a guest might just get completely lost on a point and they go down a tangent and they get off subject. And it can be hard to edit that into an acceptable piece of that little segment of the show.
Where did you just go with that? Like,
right? I've been there. We've all been there as podcasters and as editors. To make it as tight as possible. So cutting somebody off because you want to move to the next point, or just you're thinking about time because you don't want to have a 3-hour show at the end of the day, that's one thing. But if somebody is right in the middle of a point and you just jump in because you have to talk, that sucks. And it's hard enough in a real life environment. It's harder in the digital environment or the virtual environment because it can lead to feedback and screw up the sound of the show. But also on the listener end, that's hard to listen to. And
it's overwhelming.
It really is. No, I mean, I was pretty much done with my point, so no, you didn't. No,
okay.
But no,
I thought I heard
right,
a pause
though.
there. I try and be intentional with that a little bit, though. You know, I try and wait to see. Like, I wait for a pause because you can always tighten up a space. You know, I used to be very bad at this. Like, I would get so excited to have a conversation, and I would just be so excited about what my guest was saying that I would like hop in. In a time when I shouldn't have, and would completely cut them off. And then I would listen to some of the episodes back. I'm like, oh my God, like I didn't even let them finish their thought and it would have been so good. So what I started doing was I started muting myself. So when I would get excited, I would just mute myself.
That's smart.
Right? Thanks.
That's
smart.
And
then eventually like train myself to hold it together. You know, it's only 5 minutes. Like you're going to be okay.
That's a good first step. I've never thought of that. My inkling has always been that once the guest finishes their point, I leave at least a 2 to 3 second gap before I start speaking to make sure they're done. Because I can go back and edit that to whatever I need it to be. So it sounds like there was a natural transition. But that way I know I'm not stepping on their point or cutting them off before they reach the conclusion of their point. So both of those, I think my process, your process, it both works. As long as you can get to that point to where you're letting the full thought come forth. Again, keeping listener experience in mind, when you let a person finish their thought, it lets that listener absorb that information. And don't be afraid of a little bit of silence, because sometimes that can make a listener, maybe if they've started daydreaming or they're doing something else in the moment, they might think, wait a minute, did I just miss something profound? Because there's all this silence. Now they're going to get back into it and stay more engaged.
That's an excellent point. And I think that, we can not see the value of having that white space. And I'm someone, if I'm in a room of people and everyone is like awkwardly quiet, I need to talk. Like I can't handle it. I can't, I get so awkward. I'm like, okay, someone say something, I have this like networking group that I'm in. And if everyone's sitting on the Zoom, there's like 20 people and like not one person is saying something, I'm like cringing on the inside because I'm like, why is no one saying anything? I'm so,
Yeah, that's the podcaster in you.
Yeah, 100%. I'm like, yeah, okay. I'm like, let me say something, and then I'll like crack a joke, and then it like starts a conversation. I'm like, okay, this is good. I feel so awkward. But another thing that I've also done, so if you're listening to this and you're similar to me and you can't help yourself and you just get so excited, try muting yourself first, and then like teach yourself to like hold it back, because like, you don't have to respond to every single thing all the time. Right. But one thing that I've learned to do, instead of jumping in with words, when I agree with something and I'm very excited about something, I nod my head a lot when the person is speaking.
Me too.
And I'm okay with that,
Yeah.
On YouTube, it probably looks nuts, but oh my goodness. In any case. Okay, let's talk a little bit about distractions when you are recording. Things like notifications.
Yeah. Things,
chaos in the house, like all that kind of stuff. What are your thoughts? I don't have notifications on. Just turn them off.
Turn them off. I mean, if you are the type of person, and this always stems from a conversation I guess we can call it a meeting. Back in the world I used to be working in, I had this company reach out to me that wanted to meet with me. Let's meet for coffee at Starbucks. It was before this other event. Starbucks was right next door. I said, that sounds great. So I go in, and it was two people from this company, and the CEO sat there on his cell phone the whole time, or on his smartphone, just scrolling. Didn't look up once.
Wow.
To the point where I finally said, why are we even doing this? And he finally looked up and goes, what? And I go, you're not paying any attention to me. What is the purpose of this meeting? And he got kind of mad at me. And I'm like, go ahead and be mad. You asked me here. This is a waste of my time. Yeah. If you can't give me your attention for half an hour. That's how I look at this environment as well. If someone is willing to bring you on their show and put your expertise center stage and give you this platform to extol the virtues of what you're passionate about, and you can't put your freaking cell phone on silent for half an hour because you might miss something that you really can't interact with anyway because you're supposed to be engaged in the recording, you're doing it wrong. It's the wrong approach. If you can't resist the urge to touch your smartphone, put it in another room. But notifications, anything that could be potentially distracting. My least favorite, I mean, the phone's a huge pet peeve. It's the dings on the computer. I have that in no way, shape, or form on my computer. And I've asked people, can you please turn that off? And they're like, I don't know how.
Yeah.
I'm like, holy crap. Yeah. So now you've got that sound dinging through as you're doing the recording and the editing, and it just doesn't sound as professional. And I may sound a little harsh in saying all of this. It's not for my benefit. It's for yours. I want your message to be as professional and as clean as it possibly can be. Say a few swear words, so it's not, 100% clean. But clean in regards to those damn notification sounds, muddying the water and making it sound amateur.
Absolutely.
I'll jump down from my soapbox and let you interject your thoughts.
I like it. I'm going to pass you back the mic in a second anyways. But okay, I think that's really important. And pro tip for everyone, especially if you have like Apple products, I put all of my devices on focus mode. They have like a new upgrade where you can put everything on focus mode. Yeah. My phone is on focus mode all day long. Anytime I'm recording something, if I'm in a meeting, it's on focus mode. If I'm on a call, it's on focus mode. If I'm spending time with my family, it's on focus mode. It's just, there's so many distractions and people always need something. It's like we live in a world where, people are expected to be available 24/7 and it's just not the reality, right. And so I just think that comes back down to like genuine human kindness.
Common courtesy.
Absolutely. That's the word I was looking for. I love that.
Yeah,
I would love to hear some of your do's and don'ts on your end. What do you think?
Well, that's a big one. I think, and this is one I learned from experience, and it goes back to what we talked about in the very beginning of this series about setting proper expectations. Never in a million years did I think this is something that would have happened, but this is on a podcast many years ago, not on my current show, but we had set up everything for a virtual recording. I think we were using Skype at the time, and he joined me from rush hour traffic in his car.
No. No, he didn't.
And I was just blown away. But then I also looked at like the fact that I never did tell him that he needed to be in front of a computer with reliable internet, did I? So I'm going to take some ownership. But also, how do you expect to be engaged in a conversation if you're driving in rush hour traffic? But again, that was I learned.
Totally.
Do not
do that.
do not expect
do that.
people to just know. You have to set the table the right way. So that's a big one. Reliable internet in front of a computer. Try your absolute best to not be doing it from a smartphone, from a tablet.
Yeah.
Just because it's the potential of a distraction coming through. If you're on your phone, the phone could ring. It could just throw things off. So you want to try to eliminate that as much as possible. If you work in an office or you work from home and the kids might be popping into where you're recording, put a sign on the door. I always think back to Full House when they had the little red light on the studio when Uncle Jesse and Joey were doing their radio show. Something like that, just to let people know that you're part of something that requires your undivided attention.
Yeah.
And things like that are huge. Microphone, headphones, we've covered all of that. I think that showing up unprepared is
big one.
A big one on both ends.
Yeah.
Because again, you're trying to work collaboratively. If you come into it cold, it makes that process a little bit harder.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Those are really great don'ts. I love them. As you were telling your story about someone doing the interview from their car in traffic, I was thinking back to this situation. I've had one similar. Someone who ran a podcast in a studio. Okay. The conversation was still amazing. Like I loved the conversation. Took our interview from their car while they were like waiting to go and pick up dinner or something like that. And I was like, really? I was like, that is just so strange to me. Like that's the last thing that I would want to do. That's the last place I'd want to do an interview. You know what I mean? I'd rather listen to music in my car.
I like to think that this whole process has evolved, and I think people are taking it more seriously now. So when I was back in 2016 and this was a little more wild, wild west, I think it was acceptable to be in traffic and make the phone call or make the dial in to Skype.
Absolutely.
But
absolutely.
We're all getting better. We're all making strides forward.
Exactly. And let's end our series on 2 really fun things you should do.
Okay.
The first one would be to have fun and be,
yes,
to have fun.
Yes. Oh, that's something I probably don't say this as much as I should. And I'm thinking about people that I've talked to about this process. It's the most fun way to build your brand.
It is.
Because you're getting an opportunity to connect with someone who shares your passions, and you get to geek out for however long the recording goes, in our case, 4 episodes. And at the end of the day, not only have you started to cultivate a new relationship with somebody that could bring immense value into your world and vice versa, but now you're going to have this great piece of content that's serving the world and could potentially impact hundreds, thousands, even millions of people. That, my friends, is incredibly powerful. And if you can't get excited about getting to do that, you got to check your pulse. If you can't get excited about talking about what you're passionate about, maybe you're not as passionate about it as you thought. This environment allows you to tell such good stories and make such powerful connections. And at the root of it is being authentic and telling your story. So if you can't have fun with that, you've got to shift your mindset and either find a way that makes it fun or you go a different direction. Because if you wake up in the morning saying, man, I got to talk to Simona today, that's not a good attitude. I was the exact opposite. I was looking forward to this because we've already had to reschedule it once.
I know.
So it was nice to finally reconnect and have this conversation with you today.
Exactly. I know.
It's so much fun to do this.
It really is so much fun to do this. And we totally could have had that conversation, when we were supposed to do it originally, but I knew I would not have brought my best self to that conversation. And you deserved more than that. You know what I mean? And so did everyone who's listening. Absolutely. And so did everyone who's listening. Because, as much as these series to me are co-hosted, I'm still bringing in an expert to talk about their specific area of expertise every single month and share their value. And if I can't show up as the host in my best self, it's in everyone's best interest to reschedule. because then that means you don't shine because I'm not asking the right questions.
That's a tremendous point. And I think a lot of podcasters won't go to that degree. They'll just try to wing it. And guests too. I mean, I know I had a couple people reschedule on me just this week as you and I sit and record because they weren't feeling well.
Yeah.
I'm not going to argue. No. I'm not going to say you're calling in sick and lying about it. It's the reality of if you don't feel you can bring your A game to the mic, it's going to hurt everybody. So let's move it down the road a little bit. We'll do it when you feel ready. That's fine. If you're prepared and you have an idea of how to build content, batch content, you're going to be okay with that. If it's like nothing's in the can and I have to put an episode out on Thursday and this is the one I was relying on and you're doing it Monday, we need to have a whole new conversation and we don't have time for that today.
Exactly. That's going to be the next series.
Right. Exactly.
Oh, this was so wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing all of your time and all of your expertise.
Before we go, I'm not going to, let's do this real quick. You said there were going to be two things. I don't want to leave the audience hanging. Have fun was one. What was your other one?
My other one was, my last one was keep it casual, keep it conversational, and just keep it relaxed.
Okay. So everybody just go back and re-listen to this. I think Simona and I did a pretty good job of that.
I think we did.
Yeah.
I felt like I was talking to a really good friend the whole time.
And that's the value that I try to bring to a microphone when I'm talking with somebody. I want it to be a natural, free-flowing conversation. Sometimes some people aren't as extroverted as others.
Yeah.
And that's okay. If you're introverted, you can still excel at this. It's all about how you're telling your story and getting your value across. Exactly. So not every conversation is going to be exactly the same, but to put a big bow and an umbrella that overarches this entire series, if you show up looking to have a valuable conversation with one person, that's going to build good content that then impacts thousands. So it's all about that initial mindset and the impact you can have in the long term.
You are stellar, my friend. Thank you so much for being on my podcast and doing this series with me. I'm so grateful for you.
Well, I greatly appreciate the opportunity. This was a lot of fun, and I'll leave one last message for your audience. If you haven't done so already, I know Simona puts a ton of effort into cultivating this content for you. Go leave her a review on Apple Podcasts and let her know how she's doing. Those reviews help podcasters grow in ways that you would not imagine. And if you got something from this episode, I know she'd love to hear it, and I would too. So take a moment to drop that comment and drop that review. You're going to be doing the world a great service by doing that.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode with my friend Jason. I know that there is so much value in here that you are going to take away, that you're going to be able to implement in your guesting and hosting journey. I would love if you could let us know your key takeaway from today's conversation. And I would love if you would connect with both of us. All of our links are in the show notes. I want to call out a few really quick. Jason has a guide. It's called The Absolute Guide to Authority Enhancement, which you can find the link to that in the show notes. And you can also connect with him on his website, on Instagram, on YouTube, on LinkedIn, through his podcast, on Facebook, or on Twitter. All of those specific links are in the notes as well. Thanks again so much for spending this time with us today. Share this podcast on your social media. Tag us and let us know that you're listening. I love to hear from you. It's one of my favorite things. So I look forward to that. If you feel called, please leave a rating and review of the show. And I cannot wait for you to dive into the next episode.